And we're going to kick it off with a panel, a hybrid panel that Jay Patel is going to moderate on peer review. So Jay, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Is audio coming on okay from my microphone? Thank you. So I'd like to moderate this virtual panel. It was virtual not by my choice, but it just so happened that everyone needed to be virtual. Virtual panel on peer review. I'm a third-year PhD student in Linfield College, and I just passed my PhD candidacy paperwork, so that's the phase that I'm at. Thank you. And I conduct research on peer review and evidence synthesis with my advisor, Joel Chan. He can't be here, but he provided a lot of guidance for this panel. The reason I want to moderate a panel on peer review is that I consider it to be a scholarly staple. It's something that we're all doing, very often not by choice. And there's a lot of change in the air. That change is threefold. So one is that we have new models for doing peer review. Those have been proposed and are being implemented now. It just may be the case that we haven't heard about all of those models. There are new technologies that are being developed, being invented, and some of them are in use today. And it'd be nice as HCI scholars to be aware of some of those technologies. There's also new research that is being published on the history and philosophy of peer review. And even as a scholar of that field, I wasn't really aware of all of that history and philosophy. And so I want to lead you into that world with these amazing panelists. Before I introduce them, I just want to kind of preview three different puzzles that you can think about. The first one is conceptual, which is what is the meaning of peer review? How should we think about peer review? The second puzzle is more constructive. What are the different technologies that we might build to enhance peer review? And the third puzzle is sociocultural. It concerns the reviewer burden, the need to do many peer reviews in many different disciplines, despite not having enough reviewers to help with that knowledge work. So we have a lot of quantity, many manuscripts, and very few mechanisms to review all of those submissions. So now I just want to take it over to my virtual panelists. Can everyone introduce themselves and kind of give your name, your affiliation, your connection to peer review research, anything you've built? This might be a 1 second per panelist sort of opportunity. Maybe Arthur, Melinda, Ronan, Raj, and Lou, if I'm using the Zoom panel ordering correctly. So you could just kind of unmute and give us your elevator pitch.
Thanks, Jay. I'm AJ Boston. I'm a scholarly communication librarian and an associate professor at Murray State University. So thanks very much, Jay, for inviting me. I would have been there with you in person, but Jay wouldn't pay for my flight or hotel, but we'll get him next time. In 2020, I had written a proposal for something called PyPlate, and that was supposed to be like a peer review overlay service. PyPlate was going to ask that different facets that can be reviewed in a paper be taxonomized and then displayed alongside those papers. I have no coding skills, so if you're a student and you need a coding project, holler at me, we can do that. Since that time, I've been informally writing about peer review developments, asking questions like, what is peer review exactly? And why hasn't open peer review taken off more swiftly? So that's my relationship with peer review, and I'll pass it, I think, to Melinda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melinda Baldwin. I'm an associate professor of history at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I had hoped to be there in person today. Unfortunately, I have a sick 5-year-old, so fortunately, Zoom was here to come to my rescue. I am working on a book about the origins of peer review in the sciences. My field is history of science, and I am investigating where the first refereeing systems came from and how we got to the stage today that we have where a paper, a grant is a tenure decision. Peer review is sort of considered a mandatory part of those major scientific institutions and processes.
Hi, I'm Renan. I'm a researcher and entrepreneur. I did my PhD in AI and collective intelligence, and it was during COVID, so I ended up using science Twitter quite a bit, and it kind of exposed me to this magnificent new world of open, permissionless discourse around science. And I started thinking a little more deeply about what's happening on science social media and the importance of it, and the kind of informal, but actually really important review, curation, discussion that's happening there. Fast forward a few years later, and I've co-founded a startup called Cosmic, where we're building tools to harness and amplify that kind of collective intelligence that's on science social media, trying to empower more people to curate, review, discuss. And more concretely, we're currently building a kind of decentralized kind of science Goodreads on the Blue Sky social network. And yeah, excited to talk more about it in the panel. And I'll pass it to Raj.
Hi everyone, I'm Raj. It's great to see you all today, even though it's virtual. So I'm one of the creators of AlphaKive, and at AlphaKive, our goal is essentially to connect the world of research together. So it actually started very simply as a commenting layer on top of archive papers. Now it's kind of evolved into a lot more. We have a lot of tools for researchers for reading, discovering, and understanding research papers, as well as communities to kind of connect people together in similar areas of interest. But interestingly enough, while the goal of AlphaGuide was not to like replace peer review or anything, there's been a lot of cool examples where through the commenting layer on archive, there's actually been examples of like informal peer review happening on preprints. And so that's kind of been really cool to see. There's been examples of like papers that were later published and actually thanked AlphaCav as a platform for kind of providing feedback for authors. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about me and AlphaCav.
Hi everyone, my name is Lu. I'm Lu San. I'm a PhD candidate at UC San Diego right now. My research is related to human-computer interactions, and I'm in the design lab. My research mainly focusing on the academic peer review process, like when you're submitting a paper, when you like submit a journal, you get these peer review from experts. I think there are several challenges of the current peer review ecosystem, like the skyrocketing like submissions numbers, and there's many challenges for novice reviewers. So my research is mainly focusing on using LLM to work as a scaffolding tool to help novice reviewers or like different meta reviewers in this peer review process. I developed tools like meta reader and review flow to help with reviewers and meta reviewers. I'm really happy to discuss more about the like system and challenges in the current ecosystem.
Yeah, wonderful. So it kind of lump Ronan and Raj together in one camp. So that would be the more informal peer review, informal commenting side of things, and Lou more in the formal peer review side of things with these user interfaces you've developed to guide people to complete reviews more efficiently and work together with an AI, sort of balancing the participation is how I think about it. So yeah, I'll just move on to our very first meaty question. You can sort of answer it in the same order as before. My first question is, how do you understand or conceptualize peer review and research evaluation broadly?
All right, I think that's me. So as I kind of mentioned in my introduction, I personally find it difficult to actually define peer review outside of some version of I know it when I see it. But if I had to define peer review in a way that all acts that we refer to as peer review were to be included, I think I might say that peer review is when at least one person looks at and comments on at least one aspect of a paper before it's published. I guess I would say we often think about peer review as a static binary state on where on the one hand, a paper has either been reviewed through a journal ahead of publication or it has not been. How I would prefer that we started to think about peer review was as something more like a dynamic raft of checks that can be conducted at any time by any source. Every paper has different assessment needs and crucial feedback. We know it can arrive before publication or after the publication process, and that's through formal or less formal modes. So that's how kind of how I define and think about peer review.
So, as a historian, I'm primarily interested in historical definitions of peer review. And one of the things that I found in my research that really surprised me is that the term peer review itself is quite a lot younger than I thought it was. People don't really use the term peer review for grant review, for having scientific experts come in to review grant applications until the 1960s. And we don't see that term migrate into the world of journal publishing or tenure decisions until the 1970s and 1980s. So it's actually a term that's quite a lot younger than I had thought it was. The way that I tend to define peer review for the purposes of my work is as systematized, formalized consultation of outside experts prior to a professional decision. So I think my definition is quite a lot narrower than Arthur's. And I'm not, when I define it that way, I'm not saying that's how it should be, but that's how my historical actors understood it. And I think crucially, it is how the public understands it. For example, if I were to tell a colleague in another field that my book had been peer reviewed, and what I actually meant was that people had given me feedback on a draft manuscript on social media, they wouldn't think, oh, wow, she's embracing a really cutting edge, cool definition of peer review. They would think I'd been misleading. And so I do tend to stick to that narrower definition because I think it is so important for communicating with stakeholders outside the scholarly realm.
I understand peer review kind of similarly to AJ, it's a kind of activity that's happening as a part of broader spectrum of how we make sense of knowledge in science. And I like the concept of sense making, which I use a lot in my research, because I think it encompasses that kind of whole messy iterative process of transforming raw information into knowledge. And there, if you look at the cognitive science literature, sense making is happening in the models that they develop. It's two axes of structure and effort. And you have something like rigorous peer review that would be high structure and high effort, kind of at the edge of the top edge of the sense making process. And you have something like on social media, even that could be like a really low effort, low structure, but it is still part of that sense making process that's helping us curate, filter, perhaps information. So I see peer review as kind of one of the things that's happening in that larger process, and it's the evolving kind of process of how we make sense of knowledge.
Yeah, just kind of build off of what Ronan was saying. I think traditionally peer review is kind of seen as like almost like this control measure that we take to make sure, that like the highest quality of science is published and kind of ensuring that only like good research is kind of published and understood by the broader audience. I think it's less about like gatekeeping, although it can sometimes lead to that, but more about like kind of cultivating that quality of research for kind of to make sure we are not like misconstruing or kind of jumping to false conclusions, especially for the broader audience. But interestingly enough, I think like Ronan was saying, I think we're seeing a lot of great signals in platforms like social media and AlphaKive where there's like really cool like discussions going on where, does that count as peer review? Not sure if there's like a yes or no answer, but there's definitely like informal spaces where there's early feedback where that can strengthen the work of preprints before like formal publication. So I think especially as number of like preprints are growing exponentially right now, I think it's interesting to kind of where does that line fall under now? But yeah.
Very interesting. I think I'm kind of agree with like there's always like a spectrums of different like whether it's like formal and informal peer review process. I think like formal peer review process, which I was studying on, is more towards academic peer review process, where like there's a structured process of people need to submit papers and recruiting reviewers, and they're always like experts or peers involved in this evaluation process. Like they need to do some sense making. They also need to give like constructive feedback. But I think another like layer of meaning of peer review is more like informal. It's similar to peer feedback, like what Raj like talk about like AlphaKive, or there's some rolling review system in the NLP area that you can submit the papers and then you get some early feedback like in a monthly manner. I think this is also could include it as peer review, but it's more like the goal of that is getting constructive feedback to improve the quality of the paper. I think that is a common goal as the research and science community.
So when you think about any kind of reviewing, whether it's formal or informal, what are the bounds on who can be a reviewer? We're seeing a little bit of that change on social media, as some of you have mentioned. Do you feel like on any of the platforms you're trying to build with the different technologies that you want to include certain people and exclude others, or do you take a more agnostic point of view on AlphaChive or Cosmic or something like that?
I can give a go at that. To kick things off, I feel, yeah, it's an interesting question, right? You have peer and reviewer. I feel like peer, right, especially in like definition, it should be anyone who's like interested in engaging with the research. I think there's value to any sort of input that anyone can provide, especially if they're like take a deep pass through the paper and have thoughts about what their opinions may be. The reviewer might be a little bit trickier because I think reviewer has that connotation of like somebody who has kind of almost like on the jury panel of deciding whether the paper gets later published or not. So I think for reviewer, it should be probably somebody who has like experience in that area and can maybe aggregate the feedback made from the community to kind of and their own to kind of make that input in the final decision, whether it's published or not. I think a really cool example of this, not sure if you guys remember the kind of the controversy with the MIT like economic preprint that came out, and like how there was like everyone kind of jumped to conclusions about how like phenomenal the results were. But like if you took a deep pass, like there were like I remember reading one blog where it's like, you know, if there were something like a commenting layer where like people could kind of surface their thoughts or opinions earlier on so that reviewers could kind of see those and benefit from those, like it would just kind of mitigate that problem where, you know, rather than going like straight to like international attention, like it could just kind of, if we had comments enabled, it would lead to much more rapid conclusion to the fraud, and maybe like a material scientist who read the paper could realize that, get that view quickly. So I think in terms of like peers, anyone should be able to kind of provide their opinions, but obviously for final decisions on whether it's published or not, reviewers should have like proper like background or experience, but they should be able to like aggregate or view the feedback from the community from peers.
Just for everyone in the room who might not have learned about that case, could you briefly summarize the controversy at MIT?
Yeah, so to my understanding, it's been a while since I kind of saw the nitty-gritty details, but there's like a preprint from a very young, I think like 26-year-old who kind of showed that like AI can like really boost productivity among like material scientists, and kind of had like measured like various different factors and how they are all like statistically significant increases for productivity for these material scientists when they had access to AI tools. And it was almost like too good to be true, but like nobody really like dove deep enough to kind of like question some of the findings. And later it was like pretty sad to when people discovered that it was a lot of it was like fraudulent, and you know, data, for instance, was like kind of fabricated, and it was I think, yeah, it really made people question like how we are evaluating research preprints and kind of jumping to conclusions. I think there's definitely value in like, you know, preprints obviously have accelerated science so much, open science and open source, I'm totally in favor. I think that last layer that we really need to kind of make sure that the open science is really maintaining high quality is that open discussion layer. I think that can really benefit that.
You know, AJ is a scholarly librarian. I wonder if you know how amenable some of these preprint servers would be to including some of those extra commenting features, extra integration with other tools. Like archive certainly has integrations with a variety of tools, but any other preprint servers do you think seem amenable?
Yeah, I think about what the Gates Foundation has done with the name. One of you can help me. What's the archive that they're working with to vet their preprints?
Vera Archive?
One of those archives, if you are, I think it's through F1000, perhaps. If you are funded through the Gates Foundation, you can go through, submit your preprint, and you get an extra level of verification. Oh, that's it, Verichive. Um, and so I guess it's, this is one of the things that really kind of piqued my curiosity because it has like 19 different quality checks, but they specifically do not call it peer review. And so when I say like I don't know what peer review is, when you have a formal system where people are systematically going through and doing these quality checks on a paper and then not calling it peer review, like I don't totally know, like it begs the question for me, like what is peer review if this is not peer review? Is there like just one more thing that you would add to it that would make that into peer review proper? But to get back to your question, Jay, yeah, I think I've seen things like that, and I feel like I've seen things on bioRxiv, like I think it's called Discuss with a Q. Um, so I think there's these things out there, and I'm happy to see so many more things happen. Um, it's just a matter of getting people to use them. I know there's Hypothesis, which is a social annotation system. That's kind of a difficult one for me because it's kind of known, but you have to go out of your way to uh, use the plugin to see what the comments are. So I much prefer something where the commenting system is native to the server itself, or something that would pull different comments together, like you see the Plum X or the Altmetrics donut on articles, and that does a pretty good job of pulling together a lot of extra comments in addition to citations, but things from social media, from blog posts, from news stories, Wikipedia, white papers, things like that. So yeah, I do see those things, and I, I want as many of those things as possible. But I think it's best if you can have it kind of automatically display with the paper. And if you don't know all of these 500 different places to go, it's good to have like a centralized, I think it's good to have like a centralized place that kind of pulls all those things together.
I think right now maybe Raj's alphachive.org website is probably the closest thing to a friendly platform where authors might want feedback on their work, right? So maybe Raj, you could talk about kind of like the emotional flavor of comments on alphachive and how you think that differs from traditional formal peer review, and how you build up a system that actually is friendly, right? People actually want to be on your platform from what it looks like.
Yeah, that's a great point. This was the first time this kind of happened on AlphaKai, where an author was like going out and sharing their preprint link to their preprint on AlphaKai and inviting feedback. And so it was really cool to kind of see some of the results and emerging discussions that happened. So this is kind of on the AlphaKai version of the paper. So you have the paper on one side and comments from the community on the other side, and people can highlight parts of the paper and make inline comments. And so, yeah, there are like some really cool discussions where like really great people in the field, Raymond Gasper and like Pat Walters, renowned experts in the field, kind of sharing their thoughts, challenging ideas. It's like sometimes it's like very long, in-depth discussions. Sometimes it's more like just like pointing out some place where they think there could be improvement, or like connecting to like similar areas. Like I wrote a blog post about this that you may want to check out. So it's like not maybe super formal, but it's like really cool to see these types of discussions. And then Jackson actually like incorporated this feedback in updating the paper, and like in a subsequent post was like thanking the community members on AlphaKive, Raymond and Pat, for their insightful comments and like use those to kind of update the paper, which is really cool. This sort of thing has happened in like other fields as well. This one is especially cool because it's in neurobiology, and the author, PhD student, and professor from Caltech got feedback from the community, and there's like a lot of cool back and forth discussion and people kind of challenging some of the ideas. And later, when it got published, actually, Jay actually pointed out this to me on Blue Sky, where it's like when it was published in Neuron, like the authors actually thanked AlphaKive for like providing the platform for open discussions on preprint. So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I think we wrote a blog post about the types of comments that we see on AlphaKive, and I can send a link about that. But generally, the types of discussions we see are like, honestly, it's less so about peer review. Right now, it's more so people who are like students or industry members kind of reading papers and have technical questions about a paper that they want the author's help or other people reading the paper. But sometimes we do see these types of discussions. In our experience, this happens most often when the author is sharing the link to their paper. Like I talked to this PhD student, Jiayu, and she was basically like, oh yeah, this happened because every time people had questions for me on my paper and I didn't have time, I would just tell them to go onto the AlphaKive. And I thought that was really cool because that like has like led to so many cool discussions. So I think incorporating this sort of norm in peer review where authors are inviting feedback from the community, and then kind of using that, or reviewers can also see this when they're reviewing the paper, I think is like a pretty cool protocol.
All right, Melinda has her hand up, Raj. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Go
I
ahead.
actually, I wanted to ask Raj a question. What is the distribution like on the comments? Because Nature tried an exercise with open peer review some years ago, and what they found was that a small number of papers got great engagement, but that the vast majority of papers got 0 or 1 comments. That was sort of the mode number, was 0 to 1. So I'm curious what the distribution is like. Do most papers on AlphaKive get this kind of engagement?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll be fully transparent. The short answer would be no. Most papers don't get as much engagement as these papers. You can imagine arXiv is very vast. They have like I think 2.4 million papers, and so like AlphaKive is still very young. It's been around for only about a year, and so it's a very sparse distribution of like papers that from those 2.4 million that have comments. I'll also add in that. Given our background, we were like CS researchers at Stanford before we started this project. Like a lot of the kind of growth has happened in the CS AI space, and a little bit in physics as well. So I'd say like 70% of our audience right now is like CS AI papers. So a lot of comments kind of are within there. But it's growing. The nice thing is that with AlphaKive, we have a lot of tools for reading and understanding research papers. So a lot of people are using those tools. So we have now around like 500,000 visitors on our site every month, and most of them are using the tools for reading papers. Like we have like auto-generated blog posts. You can like chat with AI models on papers and help you like do literature reviews and get recommended papers. And so it's kind of other tools that are tangential to public discussion, but like the goal is like having these tools can help grow that network that can then channel into more discussions, both on individual papers, and we also have like communities where people can just talk about like ideas even beyond an individual paper, and those types of communities can be useful for, I think, just staying up to date and sharing like when authors want to, for instance, get feedback, right, from like what Jackson did on LinkedIn. Now Jackson can do on AlphaKive within a community where Jackson can be like, hey, I published this new preprint, like if anyone wants to provide feedback. Ronan, sorry, I saw you raise your hand.
Ronan?
Yeah, thanks for these examples. It's really awesome and inspiring to see how people are using it. And I think it speaks a lot to the value of this kind of open peer review and commenting. I was wondering if you had thoughts about how to expand it. Like ideally, it's almost like a layer you want over any scientific publication, or maybe someone should say anything on the web. Have you thought about that direction?
Absolutely. That's it's really funny that you asked that because we're working on that right now. So a lot of people, when these sorts of discussions started emerging, we had a lot of interest in like, hey, expanding this to bioarchive, medRxiv, SciArchive, like other places even not archive that people were just like, I think this tool would be really cool, especially with a lot of the features we have for helping people read and understand papers as well. And so we are building, we have a Chrome extension already. It's just, I can send it in the chat later, but it basically has a link to AlphaKive right under kind of the view PDF option on every archive paper. So we are an archive labs project, so we are linked at the bottom of every archive paper, but with the AlphaKive Chrome extension, it's nice because it's kind of linked closer to the top, so you won't forget about it. Kind of connecting to Arthur's point about you want to make it kind of native to the platform. So I think with that Chrome extension, one powerful thing we could do is kind of extend this to now even papers that are not on archive, right? Like anytime somebody is like on any paper, they could like just use our Chrome extension to kind of get like use all the features we have for instance, understanding papers, like chatting with the AI models or using the blog post features, and then they could like engage in this sort of public discussion. So I think there, we actually have this within our communities right now, where if you go to any of our communities on AlphaKive, you can upload your own papers and engage in discussion. So there's been cool examples where people have uploaded like a paper or like an in progress like preprint, and like people have commented, inline commented within the community on that. And we're really interested in expanding that to like just broader, even outside our communities, so people can use those features. Yeah.
I'm running a little bit low on time. I just want to open it up to audience Q&A. Lou, maybe you could type your question in the chat and we could get to you as well. Let the panelists speak up. Just take it in any order that you like, whoever speaks up first.
Hello, this work? Yes, Catherine Plaison, once HCIL. I think maybe one thing was missing here is I feel like there is a big difference of where you're doing your peer review. So there is not one definition of peer review. So doing a peer review for a poster paper is completely different from doing a peer review for a journal paper. Where I feel like as a reviewer, you know, when you do a peer review for a journal, you're putting your reputation on the line. You're not going to let this paper through until at least the claims are appropriate, for example, just to pick a sample. While a poster, you're just going to be focusing on helping the person do better and you know, move along in their work. It's completely different. And I feel like most of the discussion we heard so far was mostly about that. I can't say low level, it's more chat discussion, helping each other, providing feedback. But while some peer reviews, which I think are more important, are you're putting your reputation on the line by say, you know, approving a paper or rejecting it, and more importantly, improving it enough that it can be published or not. And that's completely different.
Yeah, I think some of the panelists have something to say about that, so I'll let them take care of that.
I totally agree with that. I think we actually, Jay, we had that on the agenda to discuss like the scope of what we meant by peer review, but the person with the question was totally correct that whether you're peer reviewing for a poster, a journal, or a grant, these are all different processes and they each have their own set of challenges and limitations. So we didn't get into that, but I fully agree with the question.
Yeah, and I would just jump in and say that I agree too, and that I think that even if you're specifically talking about, let's say, being a referee in the realm of journal publishing, the way you behave as a referee at each journal may be different. That, you know, maybe one journal has tells its referees that they're looking to publish exciting high-risk results, even if they're slightly outside the scientific mainstream, let's say, whereas another journal really only wants to publish the top results that are going to be of interest to people across fields, a place like Nature or Science. And I do think that there's a risk when we talk about sort of peer review as a catch-all category that some of these distinctions maybe become a little flattened, and we develop the expectation that there's one thing that's called peer review that is basically the same everywhere. And it's, as the commenter pointed out, it's really not the case. So I agree with the question and thank you for it.
I wasn't going to talk again, but Melinda touched on something that I have to do my little rant. Peer review is different across journals. And as a librarian, we're an EBSCO host school. and we teach students how to search for articles there. And there's a radio button on there that says to narrow by peer review or not, and I hate it because it's meaningless. Because I think it's like a thought-stopping sort of cliche, because what peer review means in one context does not mean what peer review means in another context. And going back again to something else Melinda had said earlier about who the different stakeholders are, she had mentioned that there's the public perception of what peer review is. There's also student perceptions of what peer review is. And then even within faculty members, things are so different by discipline. Two faculty members at the same school can talk about peer review, and they're talking about two totally separate processes with their own set of challenges and quirks.
So I know there's a lot more we could say, but let everyone type it in the chat for the Zoom attendees. Right now we are running into the end of our panel. So we just want to thank all of our panelists for attending virtually. So a round of applause for them.